Hi. A few months ago I released a video in which I argued that the Dutch tax-funded state media outlet, the NOS, has extensively violated the Dutch media law with the reporting about police violence in the United States. The NOS failed to engage in actual journalism, but instead engaged in shameless propaganda regarding this issue. If you haven't watched this video yet, please do. The link can be found in the description. The NOS is a Dutch tax-funded media organization and therefore it must live up to the Dutch media law, but that is not all, because since the NOS is a Dutch organization that operates in the Netherlands, it must also live up to the Dutch law in general, such as the first article of the Dutch constitutional law. This article prohibits discrimination, among other things, based on race. The Netherlands is one of the least racist societies on the entire planet, and the idea that people should receive the same treatment irrespective of their skin color is something that by far most Dutch people agree with. But can this also be said about the people that are working for the NOS? Does the NOS act in accordance with the first article of the Dutch constitutional law? This is the main question that will be answered in this second video about the NOS. On the 2nd of October 2017, the NOS in their daily 8 p.m. broadcast opened with the following words.
Een witte man van 64 schiet met een automatisch wapen op duizenden bezoekers van een muziekfestival in Las Vegas.
In the very first sentence about the horrifying event in Las Vegas, the NOS immediately mentioned the skin color of the perpetrator and showed the face of the man in the screen. And this makes sense because this man has committed a horrible crime. Also in their online news articles about this event, the NOS showed the face of the perpetrator and gave the man's name. On the 29th of September 2017, a dangerous nutcase raped and murdered a girl in the Netherlands. After it became known who the perpetrator was, on the 12th of October, the NOS in their 8 p.m. broadcast showed a picture of the person in question and provided the viewer with the man's name. In 2016 and 2017, a certain perpetrator in Rotterdam killed 5 people in a nursing home by giving them an overdose of insulin. After it became known who the perpetrator was, on the 13th of November 2017, the NOS in their 8 p.m. broadcast somehow did not provide any details about the perpetrator, nor about the ethnic origin of the person in question. Instead, the NOS spoke about a 21-year-old Rotterdammer. And this is strange because this information actually was available outside of the NOS. The perpetrator is a black man from Suriname and his name is Rahid. Only 2 years later, in 2019, did the NOS start mentioning the man's name in their online articles about the aftermath of the murder. Likewise, on the 16th of February 2019, the NOS released an article about an event in Chicago in which a perpetrator killed people. In contrary to the case with the Las Vegas shooter, the NOS in their news article did not show a picture of the perpetrator, but instead showed a picture of some police car. Also, the NOS did not mention the skin color of the perpetrator. The NOS instead simply spoke about, quote, a 45-year-old shooter. The shooter, however, was this black man. When in the United States a policeman who killed a black American got sentenced to prison, the NOS created an article in which they in the title showed the race of the victim. They then showed a picture of the policeman, and the very first sentence of the article was, quote, a 40-year-old white policeman from Chicago got sentenced to almost 7 years in prison for killing a black teenager in 2014. So now suddenly in this case, the ethnic details of the perpetrator and the victim were somehow so important for the NOS that it was the very first thing that they told to the Dutch audience about this murder. On the 27th of January 2019, the NOS released an article about a perpetrator who committed 5 murders in Louisiana. In this article they again very clearly showed the face of the white perpetrator. On the 13th of December 2017, the NOS also had no problem showing the face of the man who killed a Dutch businessman, again a white perpetrator. However, when on the 8th of April 2019, 4 guys got stabbed by a group of Syrian migrants. The NOS did not show a picture of the perpetrators, nor did the NOS mention that the perpetrators were Syrian migrants. So it seems that this organization, which must live up both to the Dutch media law and to the Dutch law in general, including Article 1 of the Dutch constitutional law, is very active in communicating ethnic details of perpetrators, as long as these perpetrators are white. When the perpetrators are not white, the NOS behaves in a dramatically different manner. On the 7th of September 2020, the NOS released an article about a man having been arrested for a series of knife attacks in the British city of Birmingham, 1 dead, 7 wounded. The perpetrator being, quote, a man of 27 years old. No information was given about the ethnic background of the perpetrator. The perpetrator, however, is Zephaniah McLeod, this black man. So the NOS actively decided to withhold this information, and also no update was given with this information later on. But this is not all, because the NOS's racism problem even goes a bit deeper than this. Because when in July of 2017, 40-year-old white woman Justine Damond got killed for no reason by a black policeman, the NOS did not report this event at all, meaning that it simply wasn't newsworthy enough for the NOS. This is strange because when a white policeman from Chicago got sentenced in 2019 for killing a black kid, the NOS created an article, despite of the fact that the actual murder took place in 2014. Now, when also in that same year, in 2019, the policeman who killed Justine Damond got sentenced to prison, the NOS did not think it was newsworthy enough to give an update about this to the Dutch viewers. To make a long story short, the NOS does not care about an innocent woman being killed for no reason by a cop, simply because the victim and the perpetrator have the wrong skin colors for the NOS. Who also had the wrong skin color for the NOS was Cannon Hinnant, this 5-year-old kid whom got shot through his head by this black man. And this disturbing event happened on the 9th of August 2020. So just after the NOS was making all of these false claims about racism in the United States, this happened, and they decided to completely ignore it. The 5-year-old kid and the perpetrator simply had the wrong skin color for the NOS's chief editor. Who also had the wrong skin color for the NOS's chief editor was Nick Sandman. Never before did the NOS's deep-seated racism become as clear as it did when there was a scene involving 3 different groups on a pro-life demonstration in the United States. A group of Indian American activists, a group of black Hebrew Israelites, and a group of American school children from a Catholic boys' school. One of the Israelites was yelling a lot of religious stuff, the schoolboys were occasionally jumping up and down and singing songs, and one of the Indian Americans was playing a drum. But at a certain point, the group of Indian Americans physically approached the group of schoolboys and positioned themselves very close to them. One of the Indian Americans stood right in front of Nick Sandman as he was playing on his drum, while one of his friends was yelling at another school kid that the land, the United States, belonged to the Indian Americans and not to the white Europeans.
No, it's not. You've been here 3 generations compared to us. We've been here a million fucking years. So get the fuck out of my face with that shit.
The NOS then reported that in the United States an event had taken place in which school kids bullied a Vietnam veteran of Indian descent.
Ophef in Amerika over een ogenschijnlijke confrontatie tussen scholieren en een Indiaanse Vietnam-veteraan. Dat was tijdens een demonstratie in Washington. Op beelden is te zien dat leerlingen van een katholieke jongensschool joelend om een man van Indiaanse afkomst heen staan. De man was bezig met een ritueel om andere veteranen te eren en scholieren sloten hem in en daagden hem uit.
And journalist Wouter Zwart, who at that time was correspondent in the United States, claimed the following on his Twitter profile, quote, "For minutes the man was surrounded, intimidated and laughed at by the boys, who were there for a pro-life protest." And this basically shows that this man was not engaging in honest reporting, despite of the fact that he is legally obligated to do so. In addition, addition, a quick look at some of the comments, such as this lady wanting to punch a 16-year-old kid in his face, immediately make clear that NOS reporters like Wouter Zwart are actually spreading hatred. No, this lady didn't know that Nick Sandman was not actually bullying this man. She didn't know that this tax-funded NOS correspondent was spreading racist disinformation. For the NOS, it didn't matter that the Indians approached the school kids instead of the other way around. Nor did it matter for the NOS that Nick Sandman was only 16 years old and actually didn't do anything wrong. For the NOS, this kid is the embodiment of evil, simply because of the color of his skin. And therefore they presented the face of Nick Sandman to the Dutch audience as the face of evil. The NOS did not show the face of the black Israelite.
This is your nationality. You're not an Indian. Indian means savage. You know where that name came from?
The NOS didn't show the face of the aggressive Native American who was yelling in the face of a child that this land is his land.
You be white. You be white. You be the white man about it. That's all you need to learn how to do.
The NOS picked and chose the face of Sandman because of the color of his skin. And by coincidence, during that same week, from the 21st of January 2019 onwards, a disturbing video was being shared on social media, on which a defenseless white Dutch kid could be seen getting severely beaten up for entire minutes by a group of non-Western migrants. In their 8 p.m. broadcast of the 22nd of January, the NOS stated that there had been outrage on social media about the abuse of a 15-year-old boy from Spijkenisse, and shortly showed some parts of the video to the Dutch viewer. Now, while they did show the face of Sandman, they blurred the faces of these perpetrators. Also, in the article that the NOS created about this topic, they did not show any pictures of the perpetrators nor of the victim, and neither did they mention the skin colors of the perpetrators and the victim. So the NOS gave Nick Sandman, who did not break any law, a harsher treatment than they gave any of these non-Western boys who beat up a defenseless Dutch kid. The boy from Spijkenisse and the perpetrators had the wrong skin color for the NOS's chief editor. Who didn't have the wrong skin color for the chief editor, however, was this white perpetrator who killed a couple in the US. On the 25th of May 2019, the NOS clearly showed the white perpetrator in the screen. So when in the US there is a white victim and a black or otherwise non-white or non-Western perpetrator, the NOS does not report it. And this is of course very easy to do for the NOS and to get away with whenever something like this happens in the US, because it is not like the Dutch will notice it when the NOS lies by omission about things happening on another continent. However, when something like this happens in the Netherlands, the NOS of course cannot ignore it. In this case, the NOS does something else. On the 19th of April 2020, Rick van der Rakt was driving his bicycle near his hometown and ended up getting stabbed to death by a certain perpetrator. The NOS created 2 articles about this. In none of these 2 articles did they mention the name of the victim, nor did they mention his skin color or show a picture of his face. The NOS cares more about some black criminal dying in the United States than about a law-abiding young white Dutchman getting killed in the Netherlands. Similarly, on the 8th of August 2020, Bas van Wijk got murdered in cold blood in a park in Amsterdam after he commented on a bunch of thieves stealing the watch of one of his friends. The NOS did not show the picture of the victim. In none of the articles that the NOS created about the silent marches that were organized by the Dutch people did they add a picture of the victim to the article. So sorry Bas, you got the wrong skin color for the NOS. The NOS doesn't care. If your skin color were black, then the NOS would have shown your picture on their website. But because you are white, they did not. And both of these 2 young men got murdered by non-Western migrants. Rick van der Rakt got murdered by a Sudanese migrant, and Bas van Wijk got murdered by a Moroccan man. The NOS withheld this information from the Dutch tax-paying audience in both of these cases. And by the way, what do you think would happen if a 7 7-year-old black girl in the United Kingdom were to get stabbed to death by a white British man. Do you think the NOS would care to report it? Well, in any case they did not, when white 7-year-old Emily Jones got stabbed to death by an Albanian migrant in March of 2020. The NOS did not report this horrible event. Let's conclude the following. Whether or not the NOS views a murder as newsworthy depends on the ethnic background of the people involved. In addition, whether or not the NOS in their reporting provides information about the ethnic backgrounds of the perpetrator and victim also depends on the ethnic background of the people involved. It basically works as follows. If in the US a murder takes place with a white perpetrator and a black victim, the NOS reports it, very clearly mentions the ethnic background of the people involved, constantly keeps the Dutch audience updated, and so on. If both the perpetrator and the victim are white, the NOS reports it a little bit, because of course not all murders that happen in the US are newsworthy, but the NOS occasionally mentions and shows white American perpetrators to the Dutch audience. If the perpetrator is black and the victim is white, the NOS basically fully ignores it. Doesn't matter if the victim is only 5 years old, doesn't matter if the perpetrator is a policeman, and when there is a black perpetrator and a black victim, the NOS basically also ignores it. And this is actually quite interesting, because statistically speaking, black on black crime in the US is extremely high. For the Netherlands it is a bit different, as they cannot just fully ignore events. It is just that they suddenly use very vague language whenever the perpetrator is of non-Western origin, and the same logic the racist NOS applies elsewhere in Europe. For example, when a French bus driver got physically attacked by 4 migrants and later died as a result of his injuries, the NOS reported that a, quote, incident had happened in which a bus driver got abused by 4, quote, passengers and later died. The Netherlands is one of the least racist countries on the entire planet, and the first article of our constitutional law prohibits discrimination, among other things, based on race. So does the NOS act in accordance with the first article of the Dutch constitutional law? The answer to this question is absolutely not, because this organization has racism in its very core, because the way in which they do news reporting, which is their core business, is fully dependent on race. It is dependent on the race of the perpetrator, it is dependent on the race of the victim. Whether or not they report something depends on race. The way in which they report something, the titles they use, the pictures they use, etc., depends on race. The NOS is a state-funded racist organization which has no place in a country like the Netherlands. Thanks for watching this video, and please share it with other people. Thanks.